welcome to the Let's Connect series of interactive meetings that we are doing about once a month, except for those months of Christmas and so forth. So we're trying to build a connection over the whole country because we're a national Unitarian organization for social justice, the only one really at the moment. I think CUSJ has stopped their social action thing, and they were limited to what they could do. We are not a charity, so we can do what we want and speak up, and we don't have to be scared of repercussions for our charity status because we don't have one. So today's meeting features champions SOGI123 in education, sexual orientation, and gender identity, easy as 123 with Liam Patterson-Morris. Thank you, Liam, for coming. And mark your calendar for our next CUSJ meeting, which will be on Saturday, February 24 this year at 1 p.m. Eastern and 10 p.m. Pacific, and so forth over the country. When the Aboriginal leader Kayoki Waitak, the Ajaski gardener, will explain a relationship with UUs in Ottawa to have an indigenous garden and much more on unceded land that was now part of First UU Ottawa. So see our Just News Express coming up for more info and links. And if you don't get the Just News Express, I think you do, otherwise you wouldn't be here probably. There is a way on the website to subscribe to it, and otherwise just let us know via cusjmedia@gmail.com. And if you have any suggestions for a great subject or speaker, let us know too. Then today's team of co-hosts are members of the CUSJ board, and I am your main host, so you can blame it all on me if things go wrong, and sometimes things just go wrong. So we have room for 3 more members on this wonderful team of the CUSJ board. So if you feel compelled to keep this organization going and have a national organization on social justice that is Unitarian, please contact president@cusj.org or cusjmedia@gmail.com. The agenda for today is basically chalice lighting, land acknowledgement, social justice issues across the country, which might be an inspiration for others to do something similar. And also, if we can perhaps help via petition, signing petitions, or even financially if it is necessary. So this is very helpful. Somehow the social action committees are not quite aware of this feature, and I encourage everybody to address that at their social action committee in their congregations. And some social action committees, unfortunately, are not as active anymore because it seems that everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people have other things on the go. And the whole commitment to social action is dwindling, and we want to revive this all. Then comes the main address, and followed by Q&A. And I understand that Liam will also accept some questions or so during his speech, but please keep it brief so that we can continue. And then we have now the traditional Unitarian chalice lighting by Joy. Joy?
Okay. Being inside, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Being inside someone's community knowing someone's life path, holding their joy, their struggle, their grief is a spiritual act. What we are going to do today with Liam is a spiritual act in understanding the lives, the kind of communities that we often don't understand and we often reject. Liam is going to help with this light to open our eyes and help us open others to the communities he will speak about. So be it.
Thank you, Joy. Very nice.
Okay, now I will try to make that visible from now on.
Thank
Go
you.
on. You may do the land recognition now.
Yes, I will do that. Okay, go on sharing again. This is a land acknowledgement for basically the whole country. We respectfully recognize and acknowledge the relationship that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis across Canada have with the land all Canadians live on and enjoy. This acknowledgement should only be a first step in eventually approaching restoring unceded land to the Indigenous nation or nations that previously had sovereignty over these lands. So we've come now to the current activities of your social action committees. I have a few here already, and then I will ask from the floor, as it were. So members of the Toronto First Congregation have been signing letters and petitions on environmental issues, including Highway 413, the Bradford Bypass, urban sprawl, and more. The Green Team, Green Sanctuary Group, are investigating and leading action. And thank you, Kate Chung, for submitting that to us. Then for Hassan Diab, which is still an ongoing thing, and France has asked for extradition after all was done and said for, and then they basically regurgitated, and now they want him to come to France again. Of course, I hope that Justin Trudeau keeps his word and says it should never happen again. There is a webinar by Independent Jewish Voices Canada, ijvcanada.org. Oh, I forgot an A on the after the D. My apologies. Which is on Sunday tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern time, Eastern Daylight Time. Yeah. So if you want a link, there's a very long link that I didn't want to post here. So let me know, write to CUSJ Media, and or we will send something at after this meeting to all of you. And then the greatest transformation in human history is a talk organized by different UU organizations, including CUSJ, Thursday, February 8th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time, about the transition to sustainable, livable climate, with examples of how industrial animal agriculture is a huge contributor to current greenhouse gas emissions and the wasteful use of land and water, and how we can get away from that. Strong lobby from the animal agriculture. They're fighting very strongly against any change that that would get money out of their hands. So anyway, is there anyone with more justice news from across the country? We leave you about 2 minutes per person to share. And I see that Rupert has his hand up. Rupert?
My name is Rupert Raj. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a member of the Unitarian Fellowship of Nanaimo, Vancouver Island, and I'm also a member of the Environmental Justice Committee, and we're winning an award for climate action. and we're going to be setting up a environmental justice committee table with a theme every month, and we're inviting a speaker from Strong Times Nanaimo to come in March and speak. I'm also a member of the Welcoming Congregation Recertification Committee, because we became a welcoming congregation, I think it was about 15 years ago or so. I forget the exact year. And so I was wondering maybe if Liam could come and speak to us at some point, we don't know when, to help our fellowship become more aware of LGBTQIA2S people and issues. I used to be a therapist in Toronto and work with trans and queer clients, intersex, two-spirit, non-binary, and their families and friends. So I could connect with you, Liam, after about that. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Rupert. Anybody else want to share anything more? Okay, then we will move on. After I just do something here. Okay, share screen then. And don't hesitate to send us updates also for the newsletter. We will definitely for the Just News Express, which is called Express because we used to have a very big physical newsletter that we sent to people, but we are doing a much shorter digital now. And if you have anything, let us know. So here we have come to Liam. In the series Let's Connect You Social Justice, our next speaker is Vancouver elementary school teacher Liam Patterson-Morris, talking about champions SOGI123 in education, sexual orientation, and gender identity, easy as 1, 2, 3. Liam is currently teaching students aged 11 to 13 and will be speaking about the values and the success of BC Schools SOGI123 resources, which helps students explore the topics of human rights throughout the curriculum and school activities. The students have opportunity to learn what it means to value diversity and to respect differences. They learn to respond effectively to hateful discrimination and to safely share their questions about their own identity. These resources also support school communities in developing policies to protect and celebrate 2S LGBTQIA+ youth. Liam sees the national debate around SOGI Exploration program as an opportunity coming about at a unique moment in history. So there will be time for questions after the presentation, but I will leave it up, of course, to Liam to lead his presentation in the way he wants to. So Liam, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Okay, let's just get myself set up here. And I'll share as well. Great. So hopefully what you're seeing is me in some corner somewhere and a slide mostly full screen. Can I get a nod if that's all working correctly? Fantastic. Okay, so I'm really excited to be here to talk to you and about this topic, which I feel very strongly about. And yeah, so I had initially planned to do a land acknowledgement as well. But seeing as we've had one that I thought was quite appropriate for the Canada-wide piece.
You're welcome to have one.
Thank you. Maybe what I'll do instead is maybe add to that a little bit to say that I'm coming to you from the unceded stolen territories of the Hamaquim, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And and that I hope that this work that we do today is in the spirit of reconciliation and comes from a learning of reconciliation and the action that we want to put into that. I will be talking to you a lot about unionism and how I see unionism as connected to and really like a driving force to the issues that we're talking about today, and to the benefit of human rights. And one thing that my union does that has made me very proud is at each of our big meetings, we, through partnership with local nations, participate in a ritual called the witnessing ceremony. And we can't do it physically here right now, but I think the spirit of the witnessing ceremony will be really good for us as a group to take on here. The way the witnessing ceremony works is that when in the longhouses and big houses of the Hamakwiyam Nation in what is now called Vancouver, when important matters were being discussed and people came together from all over Turtle Island, North America, to witness these, there would be a calling upon by the host nation to go to different people who had come and to ask them to provide them blankets, to provide them blankets to protect their heart and help them to feel able to approach the material with an open heart. Later, bandanas as well to help them to hear and think with an open mind, and then to bring what they had learned back to their communities as a sacred task. So all of us here are witnesses to what I will be sharing, to what we will all be sharing once we get to the questions and answers. And I hope that we'll take as maybe part of our reconciliation work, but also just because it is a sacred thing to witness and to share what we learn back to our communities, in whole or in part. I trust all of your hearts and all of your minds to take this information and use it wisely and well. So I'm Liam Patterson-Morris. I use he, him, his pronouns. And I think it's important that before I jump into this, I position myself. So I am a teacher with 5 years of experience, so relatively early career, kind of just bridging out of that early career space, which means I started teaching after SOGI was created as a policy. So I live in I have come into teaching in that post-SOGI era. I'm also an involved unionist since I started working in teaching. I am the chair of the staff rep assembly. So the big meetings I talked about before, usually I'm running them or helping to run them. And I'm also active at the BCTF level, where our teacher federation represents some 16,000 teachers in the province. Through that work and guiding that work, I consider myself a human rights activist. That's why I want to be in union work, is that I see these as directly connected. And I'm also a Unitarian Universalist, one of like many of us, and it's so lovely to see so many faces I know from UU Salish C. And that also informs who I am to this work. What I'm not is any kind of official SOGI spokesperson. SOGI is a really big umbrella, as we'll see, as a program, and I am not hired by them. I don't represent them. I'm giving you a teacher's perspective here on a policy set. Nor am I a person with lived experience of being 2S LGBTQIA+. So I'm not a queer person, and so I say that to let you know that the positioning that I have is to say, like, let's look at this policy. Let's look at how this is affecting students and the school system and society. But if you want more of a, this is what it is to be a trans person or to be a queer person in our school system, I can only speak to that as an ally or as a supporter, someone who cares for my colleagues and everyone in society, not from a personal position. So I just want to make that clear as well. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. A couple of content warnings I wanted to give you as well. So because I will be discussing both what SOGI is, but also hopefully part of my talk here will be arming you with some language around what to do, how you can interrupt transphobic, homophobic, hateful speech in the communities where you are, how you can understand the, I'll explain this term later, but the dog whistles of the right wing on this issue, and respond to them effectively. I will be discussing bigoted pushback, which includes some challenging subtopics. So there will be in this talk discussions of patterns of harassment and violent threats directed towards children, teachers, and vulnerable populations. There will be photos of hateful protests. I looked through to make sure there's nothing too horrendous there, but it is what it is. And there may be, depending on questions and comfort, a little bit of discussion of CSA, which stands for childhood sexual assault, which unfortunately, because of the bigoted pushback, has become part of this conversation, even though it really has nothing to do with, or very little to do with SOGI. It has just been brought in as a talking point from those who would disparage human rights for all. Yeah, those are some content warnings. I'll try to warn, especially when the sort of CSA is coming up, I'll warn so if people want to mute for a few moments, and then I can invite people back in as well, just so that everyone is prepared to hear. I mean, able to take care of themselves. Wonderful. So beginning from the beginning here, SOGI123, what actually is it? SOGI123 is a specific program that provides support to, or that school districts opt into to support youth to understand what sexual orientation and gender identity is, but also and primarily to make it so that schools are safer for trans and queer youth. The reason it came into existence is because the outcomes for trans and queer youth in the school system were horrible. And it was a human rights violation. That's what the Tribunal for Human Rights found. And so SOGI123 was a broad, partnership-driven policy response to that. What SOGI isn't is curriculum. So just to explain how these things are separate, curriculum is created by a Ministry of Education, and it says at this grade, students shall be able to do these things or approach these content pieces and approach these learning outcomes. So, students in grade 2 should be reading to this level, right? Reading these kinds of books, having these kinds of skills for analyzing text, and just to take just one subject, right? SOGI is not that. In BC, it is instead a collection of 3 elements. One is classroom resources, so just things teachers can use. And we'll get into more detail on each of these. Another one is discussion of how to change or improve the environment and the school culture of a school. And the third one is broad scale policy. And we'll get into each of those. The acronym stands for sexual orientation and gender identity. And the 1, 2, 3 are those 3 elements: classroom resources, environment in school, culture changes, and policy changes. And that's what SOGI is. And we'll pick that apart a bit more as we go on. But it's crucial to kind of remember, and especially when we do the cross-Canada comparison, because SOGI 123 is specifically used in British Columbia and Alberta, but every province has some kind of a similar plan. I think one of the successes of SOGI is that it's not curriculum, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. So we're going to get into our first, this is kind of going to be a repeating section in this talk. And what it's going to be is I'm going to introduce you to a dog whistle. A dog whistle is kind of a The idea of a dog whistle is like, if you've ever seen them, they're like the actual physical objects. You blow into it. It's a really high-pitched noise that humans usually can't hear, but dogs can. And the idea is that a dog whistle is politically is that somebody says something which to most people seems innocuous or sort of passable, but it lets people who agree with a hateful or bigoted position know that this is someone that is their ally. This is like a talking point often for the right wing or for quite regressive politics. So the particular dog whistle, so each time I'm going to kind of give you a dog whistle. This is something that you might hear in conversation. Unfortunately, I think we have to own up to the fact that while Unitarian Universalism is a very accepting faith, these dog whistles are still there, and we will likely want to be able to notice them and interrupt them if we want to be really effective allies. And so I'm going to introduce you to a dog whistle with each of these slides, and then right after some talking points. How can you change that conversation so that you are responding effectively to the kind of the hateful rhetoric that these dog whistles usually try to build into a conversation? So the first dog whistle is, who knows what they're teaching in relation to SOGI? And the basic answer I have to this is two parts. The first one is everyone, when I reviewed Canada-wide, it was actually a really interesting process for this talk. I reviewed Canada-wide the SOGI policies or policies related to SOGI across Canada, and it was extremely easy to do so. All of them are published. Every resource is up on a website. You never have to sign in with like some secret government or teacher sign in. It's extremely transparent what the resources are and how they are presented. I really encourage anyone who has any concerns about what SOGI teaches to go to the SOGI website. There's a little drop down that just says resources. You click on that and it will show you all the lesson plans. There's about like 8 or about 14 of them total. It's not an enormous thing. However, despite it being that transparent, I do think that there has been a real struggle in SOGI and in education in general over the last number of years to really invite parents, guardians, and community members into how schools are changing. And that's part of why I'm here to talk to you today. And it's why I know so many of my colleagues are passionate about sharing what it is that schools are actually like and how they are changing. And how they have changed. So when this comes up in your communities, maybe talk about, what kinds of, there will be in your various school districts, different ways for parents to be involved. I think usually when we find people saying, who knows what they're teaching, it's also the people who are maybe least able, but certainly least involved in their schools. And there are ways to get in. These are public institutions that are not hiding much. So on to that first piece of the 3 big things under SOGI123. The one is resources. So an important thing to understand about resources in education is that there's this idea called teacher autonomy, and this applies in most places across Canada, which is that teachers ultimately create our own resources in terms of what we're going to teach in the class and have agency over choosing which resources to use. No policy, at least in BC, can overrule what a teacher thinks is appropriate for their class to learn in order for them to access curriculum. So think of curriculum as the goal. Resources are how you get there. That is ultimately completely the responsibility of each individual teacher. Because that's such an incredible responsibility, if you think about it, in elementary school, like I teach grade 7, I'm teaching 12 and 13-year-olds. The next year, they're all going to have specialist teachers. So their math is going to be with a specialist. Their English is going to be with a specialist. But 1 year earlier, I'm teaching them every subject. And I have more than 100 curricular goals, which are things like students should be able to analyze a film to understand theme. So I'm more than 100 of those that are my individual responsibility for a student to access. So because that is such a daunting task, education has surrounded itself with this culture of sharing resources, and then institutions like SOGI or organizations like SOGI can also provide us with those resources. So just so you know what like resources are, that's everything from lesson plans, what we're going to do in the class, to where we as teachers can go to learn more, to how we can gather and communicate, how we're going to put policy in, to like posters and signs for washroom access. All of that would be considered resources. So I thought it would be interesting at this point to pause for just a moment, and take a look at a couple of examples of resources that I use in my class, so you have an understanding once again, what is the scale here. Oh, right. Sorry, I had a dog whistle first. So the dog whistle that's related to resources that you will hear from people who oppose SOGI is that somehow by talking about sexual orientation and gender identity, SOGI has forced into schools pornographic lessons. This is where we have to recognize this connects directly to that piece about teacher autonomy, but it connects directly to the massive challenge that teachers have, which is how is age appropriate calculated. So just as a little test for all of us, I'd like you to imagine a 10-year-old. Just they're in grade 5 in Vancouver. They're in grade 5, so they're in elementary school. Maybe in some schools they're about to go to middle school the next year. Just imagine a 10-year-old. All right. Is your 10-year-old the same as every other 10-year-old? Wait, is the 10-year-old in your head, think of a specific one or think of a couple, are they the exact same as every other 10-year-old? Are their questions the same as every other 10-year-old's questions? Is their ability to understand complex information the same as every other 10-year-old? I think as soon as we think for even a moment about the reality of human development and the reality that actually no two 10-year-olds are the same person, no two 10-year-olds have the same, that their age has not defined what their life experience has been, has not defined their ability to understand complex information. I think we immediately blow open this idea that curriculum should line by line tell you exactly what to teach, because children are not conveyor belt feedable, right? They, if you put a million children through the exact same education system, you will still have a million different children. And so that is the understanding that had brought us to the point of teacher autonomy. So how does this connect back to the dog whistle of pornographic lessons? Well, the answer is ultimately teachers have to answer the questions that students have. If we want students to continue to grow and be healthy, then it is actually teachers' responsibility to see, understand students and provide to them what is appropriate to them, not to their age. And so if we have real concerns that what's being taught in schools is inappropriate, if those were actual concerns instead of what they actually are, which is people thinking that sexual orientation and gender identity are concepts which are inherently gross because those people are homophobic. If it was actually about teaching, that we are actually about feeling that what's taught in schools is inappropriate, then what we would need is to train and support teachers to better understand their students, not to demand some singular conveyor belts of these are the appropriate topics and we only talk about them. So that's how I would maybe respond to the whole pornographic lessons piece. Now, onto those resources. So here's a resource. This is a poster that's up in the lunchroom, the staff lunchroom. And what it's about is about a moment that comes up, not super frequently, where, but also not never, where a student comes to you and as a teacher and says, look, I'd like you to use a new name for me, and I'd like you to use these pronouns for me. And for many, we in the public education system right now, we got this would be a trans student or a gender fluid student, and this student is coming to teachers and saying this, and since like trans and gender fluid students make up about 1% of the student body, give or take a bit. This doesn't happen super frequently, but since we have classes of 30 every year, maybe every 3 or 4 years. And so this just suddenly would be a little bit of a pace to start from, of how are you going to accept and welcome the student's request of you. So it really goes through the steps to guide teachers in how to respond, right? To thank the student, to give space to listen, to ask affirming questions, things. And when they say affirming questions, I really love the first one, which is, do you feel safe at school? Do you feel safe at home, in your community center? Where do you feel safe? Where do you feel less safe? How can I help you to feel safe? Which is the core of teachers' responses to children's concerns all the time. This next piece, clarifying confidentiality, is really important too. Children don't have access to the law necessarily, and teachers are usually students' advocates, or first one of their lines of advocates for understanding what their rights are. Something I teach my students every year as they bridge into being 12, 13. One of the laws that we have in British Columbia and in most places is that when students give us information, unless that information set will poses a present danger to them or someone else, or another child, then it is confidential between them and us up to the point where we need to protect their safety. And so we just clarify with them, because people need to know their rights, and then offer support, communicate with our resources. And offer support is a great one, because it says often, is there anything I can do to help? But also, is it okay if I share this with my colleague across the hall, this other teacher who so that we can make sure we have a good plan together? Almost no one kind of goes through these processes supporting students without engaging the whole community of safe educators, so that we spread this out and support. And that includes parents 90% of the time. In situations where parents are supportive, where the student says, yes, you can talk to my parents about this, then parents are super involved in the process of how the student will come to feel safe at their school. So that's a resource, right? I think a lot of people, when they think of resources, think about classroom lessons only, but this is a resource too. Our next one here doesn't actually come from SOGI, but has spread like wildfire through SOGI Education in mostly like later intermediates, the students I teach, so 12, 13, and then into high school. And it's just there because it's such a useful graphic for helping people understand what is meant by a lot of these words. And so if you've been swimming in what is sexual orientation, what is gender identity, if that hasn't been clarified, maybe I'll use this resource right now like I would in my classroom, just to explain what words mean. So the idea here is to recontextualize gender and sexuality, as well as sex, with a scientific lens, to explain how these things are being used as words. So gender identity represents the degree to which one feels internally. That's why it's like a thought bubble from this lovely unicorn here. A thought bubble, how the degree to which one feels like one's understanding of what it is to be female, a woman, a girl, or the degree to which one feels like a man, a male, or a boy, or other genders as one learns to understand them. Because the idea here is that genders is an idea. It's a concept that we hold in our head of what it means to be these things. This doesn't erase other pieces. We're going to get to those other pieces, but it says the gender piece, that's the bit that's a little bit in your head. That's what do you imagine yourself to be? And you'll notice that they aren't on a spectrum that goes like, on the left is more boy, on the right is more girl. They are 3 separate sliders, because the the complexity and the interplay here is the kind of complexity and interplay you have when you're thinking about ideas. Then the next one down is gender expression. So one might have one gender identity and a different gender expression or the same. And this is, how do you dress? How do you express your gender, right? I express my gender every day with my mustache and beard and my hair, and it helps me to feel the way that I understand myself to be. I think an example that sometimes clicks for people is, do you ever dress to be non-threatening? That is you expressing in your clothing or in your body language, something, right? Do you dress up for a fancy occasion? What do you highlight? What do you change about how you're expressing yourself in those situations? So gender expression is the clothing piece. Then this little gender unicorn expresses as well sex assigned at birth. So sex assigned at birth is the biological piece, which once again, no SOGI denies the existence of our bodies or the science on how bodies work. In fact, it tends to really deepen these things, because one thing that I didn't know before I started teaching and started learning in these spaces is just how common intersex children are, or intersex babies are. Being intersex means being born without all of the characteristics of one sex or the other. So maybe your secondary sex characteristics, breasts, facial hair, stuff like that are not present, but primary are. Maybe your chromosome, maybe you, for all intents and purposes, look like a man or a woman, but or male or female, but your chromosomes are different, and so your puberty might be changed as a result of that. Like there might be some different processes. Anyway, any of that, any combination there where any aspect of biological maleness or femaleness isn't present or is changed is intersex, and intersex people are roughly as common as people with red hair. In fact, a little bit more common than people with red hair now, because people with red hair are slowly being lost out of the gene pool because it's a recessive gene, whereas we don't know what causes intersex. So actually very soon it will be more common than red hair, but yeah, that's where we are right now. And so that's a pretty substantial portion of the population. This has been, there's a long history of oppression of intersex people that we should look at some point. And there's a really fulsome debate about right now, many intersex people have surgical operations in early infancy to kind of correct a defect immediately. And there's a big debate on that space, like, because intersexness is seen as a defect in some spaces. It's a bit of a debate it's a big debate that's been hidden for a long time. So just clarifies, but once again, there's no denying of the existence of biology here. There's just an understanding that there's a separation between the ideas of gender and the physicality, which is inclusive of trans people who might be born sex assigned at birth, let's say female, but have a gender identity which does not match that, their internal sense of themselves. And then below we have physical and emotional attractions. And this is where we get into inclusivity for gay and lesbian and queer people, right? This is about who does one feel a physical attraction to, who does one feel an emotional attraction to, and those are broken up separately, at least in part to support asexual people who don't feel physical attractions but may still feel emotional attractions, or vice versa, aromantic people who may feel emotional attractions but not. Who may feel physical attractions but not emotional attractions. So all it does is say, look, there's another way to look at the fact that so much of gender and sexuality exists between our ears, and it isn't simply a matter of sex assigned at birth is all of gender and sexuality. And this is at the core of why SOGI is attacked by in my opinion, very bigoted groups who are unwilling to hear that other people have a different view on gender and sexuality than they might have. So that's an example resource. Once again, these are big words. These are challenging concepts. This is not your kindergarten resource. Your kindergarten resource is about, hey, once in a while, we'll put in a book where someone has two moms so that students who have two moms feel like they exist in books and that society sees them. That's sort of your kindergarten approach. And then once we're up to grade 7, 8, 9, and we're getting into, I can't tell you how well this fits with the rest of the curriculum, because we're getting into, at that age, what are human rights? What is religion? Where does that come from? What is it to be a nation? These big conceptual pieces that mostly exist inside people's heads. So that's the first part. That's resources. And then the second part of SOGI123, the 2, is school culture. And this is where I feel that SOGI has been most successful, because what it has really said is, look, don't just start using these resources scattershot. Don't just make gender neutral bathrooms. Have a local team of teachers who are dedicated and involved in looking globally at your school, at your space, and constantly talking to the people there, the students, the parents, the other teachers, about how we're doing, and taking little, and sharing knowledge between each other, and taking little steps. So just form a committee and have that committee exist forever, so that we're in line with where our community is at. So she's really clear about, look, there's best practice out here, but best practice is really meet your community where they are, meet your students where they are, meet the safety needs of your students, and help bring the community up so that more and more students are safe. And so what that tends to look like really is that teachers form SOGI teams. I'm on one at my school, and in there we share those resources around, the ones we make, the ones we come up, we share tips and tricks. We try to enact policy, actually get a gender neutral bathroom, for example, and we try to support one another when these things come up or when it's a challenging situation. Another amazing thing you can look at the SOGI website is there's these situation planning challenges where that we do as part of the SOGI team all the time. I encourage everybody who's who's on a SOGI related board, or who wants to be a welcoming congregation, to maybe try this out with your congregation sometime. But you read out, a person comes to you and they say they want to, that gives you a situation, and it says, well, how will you respond? And it gives you some amazing feedback at the end on how to deepen that response. It's been really useful to have people like myself who don't have the lived experience of a trans or a queer person, to deepen my understanding, and then be ready to respond appropriately. So a couple of examples of the kinds of, this is the kind of thing that comes out of those places. So at our school, we were talking about how we had mostly removed gendered language from our just general announcements to people, right? So if we were talking to the class, I wouldn't say, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, right? Because I recognize that there's 1% of students are trans or gender fluid or gender non-conforming, and that would just erase their existence in this group. And so, but then we found ourselves using the very military terms that we have in school, which is like division. Hi, we're Division 2. It comes from the military. It's because, and it's the same thing. It's not super fun. So what we started doing at our school is that every class at the beginning of the year, and then often throughout it, they decide on a collective noun that they would like to be called. So on the right-hand side, these are some of the collective nouns that my 12 and 13-year-olds have tried out this year. So when I refer to them as a group, I have to shout this out loudly in a public space. My favorite one this year has been little chickens, because we were at Science World, this big open air museum, and I was trying to gather them all to go. So I was shouting little chickens assemble for a while until they all made it their way over. But these are the kinds of once again, very, very easy accommodations and changes that just help people to feel included and part of the community. And that's the goal. It's not to erase the existence of that. Some people, I will call an individual in my class sir pretty frequently, because it's kind of fun and it affirms their gender. but I will not necessarily call everyone something that leaves someone out. And these are very simple accommodations and changes that we can make that just show love, care, and acceptance of all. Another thing that that our community has done is put together out of our school. We've gotten my school is Selkirk. You can see it on the hoodie there. We've started putting together. We've got a diversity club, which started off as a GSA, which stands for Gay Straight Alliance, many years ago, but has morphed to say, well, you know, we're not just worried about inclusion and human rights for 2S LGBTQIA plus people, but also for people of color, but also, you know, human rights and inclusion for neurodiverse people. And so this has become a big collective thing. And one of the big highlights that club at our school, completely student-led, does is puts on a big old pride parade every year. And it's maybe the sweetest day of the year. Everybody loves wearing a rainbow or having a rainbow around. We have a dance party. We usually bring in food trucks the last couple of years. Parents have gotten super involved, which has been amazing at our community. And the most recent one was fantastic because we went on a tour, like a little walk of the neighborhood. And everyone who was at home, this is something that started during COVID, actually. Everyone who was at home would come onto their balconies and cheer for the kids as they walked by. Just a beautiful little moment of community engagement that like teaches that leadership and that inclusion and says, okay, the majority of the students walking in this are walking in this as allies, as people who are saying, I'm not a part of this community necessarily myself, but I value my peers and their safety and inclusion, and I want to show love for them. This is where we get to our next dog whistle, and this is going to be one of the harder ones to talk about because it is one of the more hateful dog whistles. So one thing that gets leveled at teachers, but especially queer teachers, is that by talking about this, what you're doing is creating more queer people, right? By saying, look, gender is something that is at least partially in your head. It exists as like your idea of what your gender is. It's it's an idea. It's not a straight and narrow biologically determined fact that one's gender is always the one way, is always the exact same as one's sex. By just opening up that conversation, what you're actually doing is secretly trying to create more queer people so that the queer people have more people to date. It's this really what it is great replacement theory, which I imagine we're familiar with, but is this white supremacist idea that by allowing people to marry outside of their race, you'll end up with more non-white people and white people will be replaced. It's kind of that, but it's targeting queer people, this idea that by talking about queer people and opening up that space, you are creating more queer people and therefore replacing straightness as the norm. And this is the fear. But what gets said is, oh, it's grooming, or grooming is a really disgusting issue, but we'll talk about that in just a second. How do we respond to this kind of hatred and vitriol is where I want to go. And I think I have two responses which people might choose from when speaking to people. So the first one is people who have this to say do not care about child sexual abuse. That's not what they're talking about. That's not what they care about. If they did, they'd know how childhood sexual abuse is happening, and they would be taking the steps which teachers and education systems are doing to reduce and eliminate childhood sexual abuse. I won't go into it unless people ask me later, but the stats are very, very clear. It is not queer and trans people who are doing childhood sexual abuse, who are targeting children. That is not what is happening. Removing discussions of sexuality, sexual orientation, or gender identity will not in any way resolve this issue and keep kids safer. If it would, then teachers would be all for, and union groups would be all for, and education systems would be all for making those changes. It has no connection. If when people bring this up, they aren't worried about that. What they're worried about is about the existence of queer people. And I think that's an important piece to go on, even though it's a difficult subject. If people want to know more, we could talk in the Q&A maybe, but it's a heavy topic, and a separate one really. So the other talking point I would say is we are indeed seeing more queer people. There are more queer people in society, self-identified, than there were in previous generations. If you look generation by generation, this is a poll from Ipsos done in 2021 in Canada, and it just talks about proportionality of queer. Or so on the left side here we have percent of Canadians referring to themselves. So by generation is the y-axis, and then the x-axis is in the blue, describing themselves as transgender, non-binary, non-conforming, gender fluid, or in another way, so outside of the gender spectrum, or transgender. And then on the right, it's about sexual orientation, being non-heterosexual, right? Is the little bars, and then the big percentage there, that's the number of people, the percentage of people who are heterosexual, and then the last one, prefer not to say. So there's a clear pattern here, right? And this whole it's grooming, it's great replacement theory thing is about the anxiety of people who think that this is something that schools have created, that by discussing and having people know these ideas, know these words, that creates gay people. I think it's really important that we learn to flip this on people. My question isn't how are Gen Z, the people born after 1997, so much more likely to be queer? My question is, what did we as millennials, Gen X, baby boomers in Canada, like, what happened to our queer people? Where are they? I think that we didn't keep them safe. And I think that that's what this shows us, that when people are safe to be who they are able to identify publicly, safely, and they are kept alive and safe. And I think that when people bring up the grace replacement concept, I think that this is where I would counsel people to go as a response. I think proportionality of people who are born or whose sexuality and or gender identity is not heterosexual and cis meaning not trans. I think that is maybe not exactly set, but is unlikely to fluctuate like this. I think what we see here is that there is a slow release of repression. And I think it's a beautiful sign of some greater safety. I think that 4% of people identifying as transgender, non-binary, non-conforming, or gender fluid, I think it would be 4% in millennials doubled if we had cared for and shown care and shown love and inclusion to those same people in our generation. So that would be where I would steer that conversation when somebody talks about how SOGI is grooming or creating queer people. Policy and practice. So this is the third. This is number 3 under SOGI123, and I know it's been wildfire. I hope, Joy, I'm doing an okay job at enunciating and speaking clearly. I teach 12-year-olds, so my natural speaking pattern has adapted to their YouTube viewing habits, and YouTubers edit out their own breathing when talking so they can talk faster. So slowing down is a challenge for me sometimes. But policy and practice, the third part under SOGI123, is where I think there's been is why I think SOGI123 has been successful in BC, and where I think we can, as Unitarians and also as social justice advocates, can learn from it. They recognized that you had to approach every policy level at the same time to make an actual change. So policy levels in this case are schools, individual, the school districts, the ministry, then local unions, and the BCTF. And by aligning all of those groups together on the policy before it gets rolled out, what we've ended up having is a sort of sphere of safety around staff so that they can actually implement these without being attacked from one direction or another. And it's created a unified response to the hatred and bigotry that has been leveled at teachers and schools.
Liam?
Yeah.
What is BCTF?
Oh, sorry. BCTF is the BC Teachers Federation. You'll have different ones in different provinces, but the largest level of teacher unionism. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So an example of a policy change, something that couldn't happen without a policy change, is gender neutral bathrooms. Now you'll see that the image here is not of a gender neutral bathroom. That's the best that my school has to offer, which is a sad reality. I thought I wouldn't hide it from you that we've kind of failed to do this one yet, which I think it'll be fixed by the end of this year. But maybe now is a good time to point out that almost all the pictures from here have been of my school, and sort of in the spirit of inviting you all in to see what this really looks like from a teacher's perspective. But in the future, right, or one of the big policy goals of SOGI is to make sure that it is connected directly to the fact that this was a human rights tribunal case initially. Before there was a SOGI policy, there were some brave people who brought forward a human rights tribunal case that said, look, one part of the case said, look, my child has nowhere they can safely go to the bathroom. You're a trans student who didn't feel comfortable in the bathroom that the teachers were that aligned with their sex assigned at birth, but they were not allowed to go to another washroom. They didn't want to go to the other washroom because they knew that the bullying they would receive in that room would be unsafe too. And there was no other space. There was no single stall. Staff refused to share their bathroom. It was a human rights violation because a child could not access education because they couldn't use the washroom while they were there. So coming out of that comes the policy that, yeah, we should just have some single stall bathrooms for the most part where people can go so that people can use the washroom. And this is a policy issue because of that human rights complaint. A sort of small aside that says to me kind of might change some of my perspective on this as well. When we think about like multiple stall washrooms being gender neutral, one thing I think back on when people talk about like, well, if that happened, then you would have washrooms could be made into these like dangerous places. This is like another kind of dog whistle or right-wing talking point that trans people are somehow going to assault people in bathrooms. Doesn't happen, isn't true, is the kind of thing that gets talked about. One thing I want to throw out for a school perspective on this is that for a very difficult 6 months, lovely but difficult 6 months, I taught kindergarten. We already teach how to safely be in a bathroom. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe there are some other kindergarten teachers out here, but it is a lot of the teaching at kindergarten is how to be 6 people who go to the bathroom at the same time, how to not look under stalls because you're curious, how to not crawl around on the floor, how to not put the little pucks in the urinal in your mouth because it kind of looks like candy. These are all things that teachers teach, right? And the basic piece about this whole idea that gender neutral washrooms with multiple stalls could never work is down to something that I think my gender should be very ashamed of and should be working on really hard, which is that we understand men in this society to be dangerous because men in this society have not been expected to be safe and have not been trained and made sure. We have not made sure and held ourselves to that expectation. And so when people who don't understand the trans experience think that what is happening is that a man is going into the women's washroom, what they assume is that a dangerous person is going to the women's washroom because for them, men and dangerous are the same thing. So these are interconnected pieces. We need to make men safe and demand that men be safe. And we also need to make sure that all people have their right to a washroom and to some safety. So I look ahead one day to that being something that can get talked about in kindergarten and that the standard shall raise and we'll stop with this boys will be boys nonsense that I think harms everyone. But yeah, a little aside. And then we get to the next dog whistle here, and this is a big one. So you might hear about parental rights. Parents absolutely have rights. Parents have lots of rights. They have in fact, they have human rights. It's amazing. Sorry, I'm getting a quick chat. Okay. So the rights that they have are the right to know and to know the law and to act democratically to affect it, right? And if parents believe that there shouldn't be that some of these policies shouldn't be, they have every right to support political parties that oppose them. Most of these things at the policy level can be changed by any particular government. Parents also have the right to know their teacher and to build an understanding with that teacher so that they know what that teacher is likely to bring forward or bring up in the class, remembering that teachers have professional autonomy. So that's really the way to know it. And teachers have a requirement to communicate to parents quite a lot, actually, and tend to be willing to be available even more than that. And then parents also have a right to know their kid and to help their kid to trust them. But the thing about the parental rights dog whistle, as opposed to just knowing that parents have rights, is that it's really about an ideology that says that parents own their children. That children are a subclass of human who are owned and controlled by their parents. And this is a really important thing to look at because actually children have human rights because they are humans. And this is where I think if somebody brought up, when people bring up parental rights to me, this is sort of where I like to help people go with it. Children have ultimately, like, all of SOGI came about, as we said, because of this human rights tribunal case that said this child had the right to their full suite of human rights. And we as teachers and we as educators and just supporting adults in general, we already have the main thing where parental rights really comes up is when parents want to be informed of, for example, a name change by their student. This is really where that parental rights goes. Parental rights, they say, a student comes out to a teacher and says, could you call me this name? Could you use he, him pronouns, even though they were sex assigned at birth female, right? So they come to a teacher. When these parents say parental rights, what they want is they want the teacher, no matter what, to say, okay, yeah, I will maybe call you that name. I will maybe accept that you are telling me this, but I have to ask your parents first because fundamentally they own your identity. The reason that this is an issue is because children have a human right to safety. And the only reason that that teachers wouldn't tell a parent is if the child said, do not, because it is unsafe for me. That is why we wouldn't tell the parent. This already exists in a bunch of other areas. So to give you another example, if a student has a test and they failed the test, it's something, by grade 7, we're doing a little bit of standardized assessment. Makes me sad, but it is somewhat useful to get a sense. Is there anything we need to sort out? Student does a test and they really struggle. And they tell me, as their teacher, if you tell my parents, I will be hit. I will be yelled at. I will be abused. Because we have a right to their safety, or we have a responsibility as teachers to their safety, we would need to come up with a plan that didn't include putting that child in danger. Now, we'd probably also ask follow-up questions. Are you routinely hit? Are you routinely abused? In which case we'd go to Child and Family Services. But there's this big piece of teachers, the teachers have this responsibility to the safety of students that overrules the parents' ownership of those students. I tend to think that the parents don't own children and that society doesn't own children. People aren't owned in this society, but even within the context where our society kind of says, sort of to a degree, you kind of own your children. You sort of have this control over them in terms of their medical access and all these other pieces. when they're under 13, and then it changes again when they until they get to 19. Even in that context, we still have a priority response to protect their safety if we understand their safety could be at risk. And so that's where I would take that conversation. When someone says parental rights, do you mean parental rights to be dangerous for them and get information that would make you be more dangerous to them? Because that's not actually a right that parents have, is to harm their children. Yeah. And it's obviously a tricky conversation, a tricky thing for a teacher to do. Is this child really in danger or not? And we have to make those judgments based on our understanding of the child, and generally tend to go to what is least likely to cause them harm, because that is our choice in almost every situation. So, story of SOGI, so we can understand where this goes. The big piece is, this is just the BC, these are just BC organizations. This isn't even including how it's expanding into Alberta. But SOGI has been collecting these partnerships at all sorts of different levels. I won't go through the word salad of all of these different groups, but it is this really broad scale thing. And I think that's a big thing to keep in mind for how SOGI has been so robust and survived so much counterattack. If we had just changed curriculum and we just said, okay, now new curriculum in grade 1, they'll hear this, in grade 2, we'll hear this, then the only partner would be the British Columbia Ministry of Education. Because instead it was a separate organization that didn't change curriculum, but said, we're going to do this big policy resource school environment overhaul, and then we're going to get every one of these individual groups to sign on. Now it is it's a cohesive response. If it was just Ministry of Education, all that would be needed is one new government to rip it up and take it all away, which is what we're seeing be under threat, and what we saw be under threat in Ontario, right? So we'll get to Ontario in a minute. But in Ontario, right, the decision was to put SOGI in as curriculum without necessarily having all the same partnerships. There were definitely, like, unions were super involved in supporting that, but it wasn't all the same partnerships. And so it has been more under threat. The threat is more significant that it could just get repealed, which, if we think about, imagine being a student who goes to school and feels safe because you have a diversity club, because there's a gender neutral washroom, because your teachers respect your pronouns, and because you are seen and respected. And then a government says that's gone. Actually, your teacher can't use the pronouns you prefer. Your teacher, they have to get rid of that gender neutral bathroom. And that's why when I think a thing that we overlook as social justice people in general is plan for a backlash, because as allies, we would, if we win a thing and we're happy, and we lose a thing and we don't directly suffer. But the people we're advocating for and with do directly suffer when the thing is lost. So you need to have a robust plan for how you're going to survive the pushback. What big part of the robust thing, this is my little union aside, unions in Vancouver, and this is my union's bargaining retreat plan document that we published from a couple of years back. You don't have to read it all. But unions pushed this. Unions created this. The reason we could do that is because unions are, or at least many of them, are directly democratic spaces, some of the only directly democratic spaces that we have in our society. Meaning that if you want teachers to be aligned, if you want any community to be aligned, if you want to see, like, sustainable long-term change in any institution, it is not the Minister of Education who you need to convince. It is not the employer or the bureaucracy you need to convince. It's the actual workers on the ground who are doing the thing. That is who needs to be involved in that conversation and bring it through. Bringing all those other levels in becomes a lot easier when every worker is already ready to do it. And so one of the big things I hope we learn from this talk is, let's find as social justice people, when we're thinking about how is SOGI a good example, it started and was championed inside unions. I'm very proud that the executive at my union local we're so at the forefront of this, and it has led to just so many beautiful things for within the union in terms of how we communicate to each other, but also for in our society. And so, because we were ready for the pushback when it came, which has been, you know, pretty consistently, but especially this year, early this year, there was this thing called the Million March for Children, which was a transphobic, bigoted, Canada-wide protest to SOGI being taught in school. And I'm just going to analyze it with you just for a second, because I think it's really important, once again, as social justice people, that we understand there will be pushback to the things that we do to support human rights. And if we want to be good and functional, we need to be ready to be in these fights in a way that protects the people that we are trying to uplift. Can't be, hey, we won SOGI, oh, we lost it. That is a recipe for really harming people. So unfortunately, the Million March for Children really learned from the trucker convoy. And the main thing that they really learned is that you don't protest if you are a minority, like they are, and you are loud, and that is your power. What you do is you don't protest everywhere at once across the country. You don't spread out your membership, because you're not that many people. What you do is you show up mostly in small towns with overwhelming force, and then you slowly work your way across, so that counter-protesting is really hard in anywhere outside of major cities. In major cities like in Vancouver, and I'm very proud of so many of the UUSS people who are here, because I know many of you went out to the counter-protest against the Million March for Children that was earlier this year in Vancouver, and counter-protesters in Vancouver outnumbered Million March for Children, even though they were bringing in people from all over, solidly 4-1 was the reports I heard, or more. And that's a really important piece, because when we talk about protesting and counter-protesting in the context of like these issues right now, it means an enormous amount. I remember being in my class and then going to the diversity club meeting the day after some of these protests, and I will say, like, my school had windows broken and other pieces like that. These things really do impact us. People will drive by and scream things. But just knowing that in our city, the vast majority of people who came out to counter protest these transphobic marches, and to show solidarity and care for people. And it just makes people feel a lot safer. So remembering that that's part of a plan. And I think SOGI's success here is that, while it didn't have a perfect plan, didn't know it was going to have to get ready for pushback, because it was at so many levels, it had a better setup. Last dog whistle for you, and this is a big one. The last dog whistle here is that, and we're going to see it all over the right for all sorts of reasons, that anytime anyone argues with them, their complaint is actually their free speech is being trampled on. I just want to throw out two things to help you respond to people who say, I should be able to say bigoted and hateful things because it's my free speech to do so. There are two natural limits to free speech. First one is that it stops being speech and starts being violence and causes harm. The second one is that free speech always invites a proportionate response. You are allowed to talk back to free speech. So to give two examples in the context of SOGI, so that you can talk to people who support this free speech angle. This is a horrible Facebook post from a very transphobic man called Barry Neufeld. Barry Neufeld was a school board trustee in Chilliwack, just outside Vancouver, and he posted this, and then the president of the BC Teachers Federation, who is also a member of my local, responded saying, well, that's pretty bigoted, basically. The whole free speech thing really crumbles when you realize that Barry Neufeld then sued the teacher, Glenn Hansman, for defamation. This lawsuit is actually the first lawsuit to ever get thrown out in BC for being under what's called anti-slap rules, meaning rules against lawsuits that are clearly just made up to make people to curtail people's free speech. So actually, there hasn't been cases where SOGI advocates are suing people to make them be silent, but there have been cases where these theoretical free speech warriors have been suing teachers, and in this case, a BCTF president, which is a high elected position, to try to silence them. So free from the reason it was thrown out under anti-SLAPP, the reason that the lawsuit to silence the BCTF president was thrown out was because the response saying that this speech is bigoted was considered to be proportionate. So remember, under free speech, you are allowed to talk back. They aren't just allowed to just say whatever they want without being called names for it, if being called names suits what they're doing. And then the second piece, the piece about, is it just speech or is it action? Well, I showed you that picture earlier of the parade. The place I got that picture was off of what used to be called Twitter, what is now called X. Last year when we did our parade, this horrible transphobic Twitter account called Libs of TikTok, it's quite famous actually, on the right, somehow found a video of our pride parade, our little local community pride parade, and posted the following, saying to homeschool your kids, to have them avoid like gender ideology. As you can imagine, the comments were wild. Now, why do I bring this up? It's just some random right-wing TikTok thing. Well, Libs of TikTok, famously, her actual name is Chaya Raichik. That's the person who's behind it. And she famously celebrates that very frequently, whenever she posts about a school or an organization or an institution, they receive bomb threats, they receive violent attacks. This is a way for this right wing to target specific groups and people to silence them, right? And this is the same perspective, the same side that will argue that people should be able to say whatever they want about SOGI, whether it's factual or not, whether it's bigoted or not, because it's free speech. And yet their speech so frequently celebrates leading to violence, being hate speech that intends to incite to violence. My school received, my school received a lot of threats, both in those comments and then by phone call for a little while. And it was really great that SOGI meant that we had a community, so that there was a collection of teachers who could go to the teachers who were receiving threats, or who and support the students and families as they were going through that brutal process of being targeted by an online mob. So a couple of things that one might be able to bring up if someone says, oh, it's just my free speech to say hateful things. So we're almost at the end here, friends. I think I've gone well over time, sorry. But does SOGI work? Short answer, yes. It's still very much just being implemented. But what are we seeing? Well, from very early on, we saw a massive reduction in suicides among the LGBT or 2S LGBTQIA plus community. Which was the main goal of SOGI Education, was to safeguard and uphold the lives of queer people as they went through school. We've also seen a massive reduction in binge drinking and substance abuse among the same population, as connection and community and safety is built up. That's from a study by McCreary Society. There's more studies ongoing as we go here. The other thing we've seen that has been massive is more queer and trans teachers, much clearer policy. And also, great news, BC hasn't been brought back to the Human Rights Tribunal for this. We're being brought back to the Human Rights Tribunal in education for lots of things, but not for acceptance and support of queer people, which means that we are meeting that threshold for what it means to be accepting and safe. That's a great question. I can answer it.
Shall we sort of move into the question period now?
There's just a couple. The one last thing I want to do, because I
Okay.
think it will likely come up, is just the survey of SOGI across Canada. So this is a very, very brief picture. I won't get into it in detail because I know we want to get into the question and answer. So SOGI exists in British Columbia and Alberta. In British Columbia, I'll just explain the icons first. There is a policy in place that is like robust and relatively full. I don't know whether it's necessarily being put into practice in the same way in each place. I wouldn't say, British Columbia is perfectly in place at all, but their policy is there. It can grow. The seedling ones, like Alberta, are ones where there is something coming, where they're sort of trying to build the same sort of thing, but it's not really there. And then you will notice over there in Nova Scotia, there's a seed packet. Seeds have not been put in the ground. Nothing has been done, but also nothing horrible. I don't know. It's just there. Nothing is happening yet. It's just sort of sitting there. And then we have our fires in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and New Brunswick, where there either were some beginnings of a policy or never were a policy. But these places are actively moving in a different direction, with both Saskatchewan and New Brunswick recently coming out with basically laws that say teachers have to out students to their parents, regardless of whether or not teachers think there's a safety risk there. You may also notice the little fires next to Ontario and Newfoundland and Labrador. These are ones where when I looked into it, I felt like, yeah, there's a policy in place. It's relatively robust, but the pushback makes me feel like perhaps those spaces are less secure. Ontario kind of got through it right now, but we'll see. So that's sort of across Canada what it looks like. I can get into more detail if people want to ask about different provinces. But last one, maybe little lesson for Unitarian Universalism that I think I don't know a ton about the Welcoming Congregation program, but I wonder if it could learn from SOGI in terms of being ongoing and having support at varying levels. What other partners exist in Unitarian Universalism that could support welcoming congregations to be an ongoing process rather than you are certified, then you're welcoming? How does that continue? SOGI does a really good job having a committee that is constantly moving with the community and trying to move the community forward on this human rights issue. We'll get to the calls to action later, but questions? Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah.
Okay, if I can share a screen again.
Mm-hmm. Let me stop sharing.
So we have, first of all, there was a question in the chat, I think. And I don't see it right now anymore.
So everybody would have up to 2 minutes, Ellen, to ask and receive.
Yeah, I would actually cut it down to 1 minute because we're running out of time. Yeah.
Okay.
So keep it brief. There was a question in the chat, but I cannot find it anymore. Maybe you see it.
I do see it, so I can answer that one. It
okay,
says,
let's start with that. Yeah.
Great. Is SOGI an initiative of BC unions or UU groups or something else? Where's the funding? Great question. So it is it started out of sort of BC unions and advocacy groups in BC. The funding is so really what happened was there was this idea for it, and then all the different community partners fund it. So really the Ministry of Education funds these changes. But since they aren't really things that cost that much money, like the funding is like raised from community groups to create the resources, but then everything else is just what teachers use in the regular organization of their practice. So it didn't come out of UUism, but I do think it has lessons for Unitarian Universalists about how we progress social movements or social justice and human rights inside institutions.
Okay. Then we have Rupert.
Oh, Liam, thank you. It's a great presentation you did. And as I mentioned, I'm part of the Nanaimo Fellowship Welcoming Congregation Recertification Committee, and we'd like to liaise with you. So would you be able to put your email in the chat so I could contact you?
Absolutely. I'll do that. There it is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rupert.
Okay, we have Cindy.
So Liam, I have a question about something that I don't think I'm not sure it's a dog whistle, but I have heard people say it's just a fad. Oh, these pronouns, the kids, they can say they're non-binary and they use, it's just a fad. It's a passing fad, especially with kids. And I wonder if you've got any suggestions about how to respond to that.
For sure. It's definitely a dog whistle. It's definitely meant to kind of collect people who oppose the existence of queer people so that they feel comfortable in your presence, right? And so that's why you want to be able to respond to them. So two parts to it. Maybe they go bigger, but that's usually how I tend to argue back. The one is there's this idea that it's a fad in like society and in history, that really queer people and trans people just never existed before. So I'm a historian, that's how I got into teaching. If you look back at history, there's sort of an amazing turnover coming through, especially anthropology. This is maybe an aside, but it's like a little talking point you might be able to use. There'll be all these, I remember like reading in my anthropology textbooks, they'd be talking about, two men buried holding hands surrounded by all of their worldly possessions. And it being the 1800s, what they'd say is, well, they must have been such good friends, right? There's been a systematic erasure of queerness throughout history. That is only starting to change. These people who would argue that it's a fad are sometimes relying on that. If they're talking about like kids get social credit by saying they're queer when they're not, which is the other, maybe another part of that dog whistle. It is still the case, our inclusion is so far from complete. It is still the case that there is bullying in schools that targets queer people. It is still the case that it is very difficult in society to be openly out as trans. It's extremely dangerous. People aren't putting this on because it's fun and easy. And if they were, children do this all the time. We're talking about children and children's gender. Children's gender is as wild and imaginative as children are, because they're learning how these concepts exist, and they're like learning how anything applies to them. So I think that piece is sort of ridiculous on its own grounds. So I think those would kind of be the things. Like, one, it has always existed to be queer, and two, it is not easy. It is not at all easy. We haven't got there yet. That it is safe for people.
Okay.
Thanks,
any other questions? There, Catherine.
I just actually wanted to follow up a little bit on that, Liam. In terms of like children and children's development too, like I think my guess is that there's research that shows if you allow children to explore and to be more fluid with their gender, and that just creates a more healthy sense of identity, and it is more likely to actually support, if you are not queer, you will come to that realization instead of shutting it down or trying to make it go away. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that piece.
Yeah, I mean, there is some research here that I could find for you, or we could find if we looked. It's all relatively new because it has been so rare for children to be raised in an environment where they are encouraged to consider for themselves who they are in this way. And so it has been, that piece is a little bit difficult, but I would say that certainly anecdotally, I see children who are, I mean, for sure, many like coming to their understanding of who they are and their gender in such a beautiful, authentic way. And really, when you see it, it's very hard to imagine. It's very hard to imagine you immediately know what is lost when children are not given that opportunity to understand themselves. It's so clear because it's this like bubbling up of like themness that is clear. The one other piece I might add to that, if I can remember it, this is the thing of having lists of 3 responses right away to a question. The one other piece I might add to that is like there's also some really amazing movements, not just among children but among adults that I've witnessed. That one of the ones I remember seeing this zine that was going around, little magazine just self-printed by somebody, that was about deep heterosexuality. It's like, okay, what if heterosexual people considered their sexuality and really thought about what it means and what it says about them and how they relate to their sexuality, rather than assuming it to be a default? What would that change in behavior? And one of the big ones was this one was specifically written, by a man, or it was an essay by a man for a man or other heterosexual men, and it really just said like, are heterosexual men showing love for women? If that is our sexuality, is that what we are showing? And these kinds of questions that bubble up when people are able to explore and consider these concepts, rather than leaving them as taboo and consigned to to something that just is put on your birth certificate and then that's that. Can we learn something by really understanding who we are and how we express? I think it's been really beautiful to see some of those things bubble. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Joy has her hand up.
Yes, and my volume's on?
Yeah.
Okay, so Liam, thank you for covering all this material. It's really coming together for me. One thing that isn't quite solid yet in my understanding is if a student asks for a new name and or new pronouns to go with the name, but is not yet feeling safe for their parents to know. You did explain some processes, but I've lost track of what you would do. Would the parent eventually get to know after some conversations that were set up? Or if it continues to be unsafe, how do you report this child's progress in school? What name, what pronouns would you use? To me, that's still a big mystery. Could you answer that?
Yeah. All right. Great question, and thank you for letting me clarify. Yeah, so the process is actually pretty simple. It goes down a list of sort of procedures. The first one is our first priority at all times for everybody is that they are safe. We have this duty of care to every single child. So as long as it is the opinion of the student and the teacher that they would be unsafe if they were outed, if their name was known in certain places, then we will not out them because it is unsafe. So what the actual process is like, student comes to me, they say, I want these things. I want this change to pronouns. I want this name. I say, okay, thank you so much for telling me. Let's talk about how you're feeling safe. Let's talk about the environment. And then somewhere along we go, now, where should I use your name and your pronouns? Where should I not? Is it okay for me to use them with my other teachers? This teacher, that teacher? Is it okay for me to use them when I talk to your parents? Is it okay for me to use them on your report card? Would you like me to change them in the report card system? Where would you like your name to be one way, and where would you like to be it the other way? And if they say, yes, you can call me this, you can call me this in class, but you can't call me this when my parents are around, you can't put it in my report card. And then we say, okay, now can you talk to me about why? What can we, like, obviously the safest space would be that this child is accepted everywhere. That would be the safest outcome. But the child kind of has to guide you, because they know your parents better than you, guide you a little bit on when will it be safe? How can we make it safe? What are the steps we could go through? So one of the pieces that schools do frequently around this is that we have, starting in kindergarten, we have these meetings where we invite parents in to learn about SOGI, so that their students know that they know some of the same things and are more likely to be accepting. It is that piece of like community education, because ultimately every teacher would like, our only concern is the safety of the child. And so every teacher would like there to be this beautiful wraparound surrounding community. But sometimes it's not possible. And we cannot put children in a position where they're at risk and in danger of being harmed. And so that would be the only time that that information is withheld from a parent. So yeah, that's sort of the process. It's really just like we go at the speed of the child's sense of their own safety. And we try to encourage them and support their parents to understand and accept if we think that will be possible.
Okay, so does all this mean that until that safety is established, even within the classroom, the school, the child is not yet called by this name or these pronouns, that's still kept between the teacher and the student?
Totally, yeah, totally up to the student at where and when those things are used. Yeah,
once it's up to the students, it's going to get to the parents.
That you'd be surprised. So I think some of the time, I usually when a student is telling you that they're changing their names and pronouns, you're not the only person who's being told. They're telling their peers, they're telling their closest friends, and kids also know who is a safe and who's an unsafe adult, and those other kids will keep it from unsafe adults. And that could include, right, like maybe there's a teacher who doesn't give off enough of an inclusion vibe, and those kids will not tell that teacher. They are smart. They know who is going to be safe for them.
Wow.
So we just trust them. Yeah.
Thank you.
I see a question from Avi. To what extent are safety concerns emerging in seniors' homes, a home where ageism in an additional overlay?
Is this in the chat, Ellen?
Yes, this is in the chat.
Yes.
Okay.
Great question. I'm not sure if I'm the one to answer it. I don't have a great window into seniors' homes, but I would imagine that it's a sort of a similar thing. And this is maybe seniors' homes could really learn from SOGI, how it's been implemented in schools, because it is fundamentally about, this is like a plan for how to move communities to greater acceptance and to create greater safety around a human rights concern. And so, yeah, it might be a good lens to use, but I just don't really know the state of play. I see another question in the chat, and then I'll go to Rupert. The question in the chat is, people are using the Chloe Cole case to oppose SOGI. Chloe Cole is a young woman who underwent gender reassignment surgery, sometimes we say affirmation surgery, female to male, and later regretted it and is now suing the surgeon. And this was in LA. So there are a few cases of regret, but I will say they are being. This is another like big talking point to respond to this is. There was a bunch of studies on how frequent is the regret for gender reassignment surgery, and the answer is it is less frequent than the regret for like a wrist surgery for a broken bone. So if it's an incredibly small percentage of trans people who later regret the gender reassignment surgery, and this is across North America, is across the world. It is literally less than you broke your arm and you get surgery to repair your arm. You're more likely to regret that than your reassignment. But people are people. People's gender identities change, and it can be complex. And I think we would all hope that Chloe Cole is fundamentally a safe and well person as she goes through what must have been a lot of a journey. Rupert.
Liam, regarding that question about the seniors homes. I used to live in Toronto, and there was a program there with the city of Toronto and communities to queer certain seniors homes. Fudger House was the first one. And so I don't know about other provinces, but there is a model for that, which is great. And they had the support of the city of Toronto. And regarding the last point, there are a minority of trans and non-binary people who are detransitioning, and there's something called the Gender Alliance Society of Canada, which is kind of a right-wing group, and it's run by some trans and cisgender people throughout Canada and other countries. They're a very small minority, but they're very vocal, and this is what's catching the anti-SOGI people. So we have to kind of so the way you presented your program is using logic and using community support, government support, and hopefully that will offset the detransitioning scare, kind of like the Anita Bryant thing, you know. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we can learn from the Anita Bryant situation, where she was trying to capture all these people to try to make them straight that she thought were queer, and so on.
Okay, thank you, Rupert. Yeah. Well, I think we have exhausted our question and answer time, and I would like to continue on to have the chalice, extinguishing the chalice. There's one more question here. I will allow that, but that is the last one from Yvette.
Not a question, just more information on that. Okay. Just the numbers for people.
Thank you for looking up the numbers for me.
Thank you. Okay, Joy, take it away.
We have a flame, a chalice. This flame has been burning very strongly as we have been learning all these wonderful ideas that are happening in this SOGI program. May the memory of what we have learned today and the call to the action of continuing the concepts, the vision of SOGI123 be in our hearts as we extinguish this flame, and with that we carry that memory and work on it into our communities at home, where we live and work and play. And so thank you, Liam. That was an awesome presentation. And we'll now extinguish this wonderful flame. By the way, everybody, some of us have learned that we can make a hand chalice. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? I can't see myself. So you cross your thumbs, you make a cup with the rest of your fingers and hand, and close down your chalice as I do. And 1, 2, 3. And this I call the spirit of life, the essence.
Smoke. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joy. The last screen to share. So some resources. If you Google SOGI123, you find the websites for a number of provinces like BC, Alberta, and Ontario, and wherever else it is being held. So you just Google it and you get quite a number of information websites. So that is one thing. We have, of course, our own website, CUSJ.org. Have a look at that. It is a big website, quite big, and there's always some interesting new articles. One from Doug Buck about the Israel-Palestine question in the Post. And for the rest, we have a discussion forum, and it's a CUSJ forum. And if you want to join it, write to president@cusj.org, or you can use that link there, but you might not be able to jot that down. Then the questions and remarks you can send to our cusjmedia@gmail.com. There is a YouTube channel, and you can jot that down, and just youtube.com and then /@CUSJmedia. So it cannot be simpler to just look at a lot of the past meetings that are listed there. We have also a Facebook group, CUSJ CA on Facebook. So that is all I can share with you. If you do want to be part of, but if you wouldn't be here if you didn't get, well, maybe you would have, because I think Sylvia and some other people have shared it with other people. But if you want to get our newsletter, just let us know again at cusjmedia@gmail.com. So thank you so much, and keep working for justice and compassion, and stay safe. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Liam. Big thank you to you.